Hi, I'm Melba Pearson, also known as the Resident Legal Diva, and this is Mondays with Melba. If you enjoy the content on this channel, please be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and tell a friend. So, it is still Black History Month, so fun Black History Month fact of the week. Autumn Lockwood is the first Black woman coach to win a Super Bowl. So in 2023, she became the first Black woman to coach in a Super Bowl, breaking barriers on the sidelines because she was an assistant sports performance coach for the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, this year, she became the first Black woman coach to win a Super Bowl, and this was in her role as associate sports performance coach for the Philadelphia Eagles. So amazing, number one, and it's also a great example for young women, young girls, everyone, people to follow, to know that there's a lot of amazing opportunities in the sports field not involving actually playing the sport. So whether it's be your defensive coach, coordinator, your offensive coordinator, your athletic performance, all of those types of things, these are all great careers that can end up giving you a Super Bowl ring without actually having to abuse your body. There's that. So there's your fun Black history fact for the week. Oh, I'm going to give you one more. Because since we're sticking with the Eagles, quarterback Jalen Hurts. Yes, Jalen Hurts, who is MVP, just absolutely did an amazing job in the Super Bowl. I mean, he just killed it. He has an all-female management team. Yep. All female. And that's including attorneys, publicists, marketing, agent, everything, all women. And it was a woman that negotiated his $255 million extension contract back in 2023. Trust and believe when that contract is up, I would not be surprised if that money gets even higher because his performance has been on point. Okay, enough of football. Now we are digging in to a whole bunch of cases and including some very interesting updates. So the first case that I'm diving into this week is the case of Sonya Massey. Now I did a previous video on this case just to give a quick recap. This is a case out of Illinois, around Springfield, Illinois, like it's basically a suburb. And this was a situation where clearly Miss Massey was struggling with some mental health issues. She believed that there was intruders lurking around her house and had broken into her car and all of this. So she called the police, hoping for them to assist her in the investigation. Although the police responded, there was some dialogue back and forth. Cops were getting a little frustrated because, again, she wasn't giving straight answers. Clearly not all together there, unfortunately, right? And again, that's one of those things you deal with as a police officer. Some people, whether it be mental illness, whether it be intellectual disability or whatever, is not always able to respond to you as quickly in a manner as you would like, right? So you have to be patient. That's just reality. And so the officer involved in this case, Officer Grayson, had pointed out that Miss Massey had a pot of boiling water on the stove. And so he basically was like, hey, can you take that off the stove? Because, we don't want to have an incident here. And they kind of joked and laughed about it. So she went, and now keeping in mind the original discussion happened in the living room, she herself alone went to the kitchen to start to move the pot off the fire. Grayson follows her in there, but again, huge distance between him and her. He wasn't like on top of her. And so, she's getting the pot, and then he starts to back away. And she's like, what are you backing away for? He's like, oh yeah, I don't want to get hit I want to get away from steam. I want to get away from the steaming water, haha. And she's like, my pot is steaming water? I rebuke you in the name of Jesus. Now, we could all surmise what her thought process was there. We will never know. Because Grayson pulls out his gun and starts cursing at her. And when I say cursing, full on F-bombs. Screaming at her, whole thing. Mind you, he had a partner. So it's not like he was in this house by himself. She freaks out and is like, oh my God, I'm sorry, puts her hands in the air, ducks down, and is like clearly cowering in fear. Yeah, that wasn't enough for him. He went ahead and shot her 3 times and killed her. So, keeping in mind, at this point, while he was backing away, he was not actually in the kitchen. He was more towards the living room. So he was facing her, but he was separated by the counter that divided the living room and the kitchen. So what the prosecutor said after this case was investigated was basically, listen, he had plenty of distance and relative cover from Massey and the pot of hot water. So, I could see a different discussion if he was right on top of her and she's holding it like she's about to throw it at him, but there was plenty of distance and he could have backed up, right? So what makes it even more disgusting is that after he shoots her, her partner's like, okay, let's go get a medical kit. Let's try and help her and save her life. And he says, no, you can go get it, but that's a headshot. That's nothing you can do, man. And his partner was like, she's still breathing. Let's try and do something. Let's try stop the bleeding. And finally, at that point, the other deputy convinced him to try and assist. But of course, it was too late. Grayson, of course, tells the cops responding, she was coming at me with this pot of boiling water. She said she was going to rebuke me in the name of Jesus. She came at me with the boiling hot water. Small problem. Body cam footage does not support his side of events. And I'm sure his partner didn't either. So, state of play at that point, Grayson has been criminally charged. We'll get into that momentarily. But the Massey family also filed a civil lawsuit against the department, the Sangamon County Sheriff's Office, and Sangamon County as a whole. On what would have been her 37th birthday, her family announced that they got a $10 million wrongful death settlement. This is the largest settlement of any kind for that particular county, which is huge. As I touched on earlier, the officer involved in this is no longer an officer because he got fired with a swiftness. And the officer, his name is Sean Grayson, 30 years old, has been held in jail with no bond after a grand jury charged him back in July of 24 with first-degree murder, aggravated battery with a firearm, and official misconduct. And he's sitting there in jail waiting for trial. Interestingly, Sangamon County Sheriff Jack Campbell wrote on the agency's Facebook page back in 2024 that Grayson had other options available that he should have used. He had the training, tools, and experience to know better. The public can see what we saw. Sonya Massey lost her life due to an unjustifiable and reckless decision made by former Deputy Sean Grayson. He will now face judgment by the criminal justice system and will never again work in law enforcement. He further said, Miss Massey lost her life and her family deserves answers. I trust the legal process will provide them. Her father and her family have been very outspoken about all of this. Sadly, her father had a lot of health issues, including some heart issues. And he even made the comment that if this had happened at a different point in time, about 2 years earlier, he probably would not have survived the pain and the shock of losing his daughter in this manner. Also, lawmakers in Illinois had introduced a bill called the Sonya Massey bill, which aims to prevent what they called frequent flyers. So basically officers that just hop from department to department because they were hella problematic. And in this particular case, Grayson worked at 6 police departments in 4 years. Yeah, that's somebody who clearly has a huge problem. And this was clearly preventable. So obviously, that would be why the settlement happened, quick, fast, in a hurry. And now we just have to wait until the trial happens for Sean Grayson. And hopefully there'll be some accountability from the criminal system. The civil system did give the accountability, but now it's a matter of that criminal accountability. Especially now as we're seeing disturbing things around the Department of Justice and how now they actually deleted the database that listed the names of federal agents who were problematic, used excessive force, were untruthful, etc. is going to be very critical on the local level that states are having these kinds of laws and these types of websites and resources that people can see who the problematic cops are, and they're not like hidden and basically supported when all they're doing is harming the community. Again, not all officers are bad officers. We all know that. But the ones that are bad need to be outed, need to be fired, and need not be rehired anywhere else ever again because they present a danger to the community. Period. End of story. We continue to say her name, Sonya Massey. She should be with us today. Now, Florida, I'll talk about my home state that just keeps on giving. The Florida legislature passed a bill that was signed by the governor that would allow for mandatory death penalty for people that are immigrants. Yeah. So this was a bill that would make the death penalty mandatory for immigrants who are in the country illegally, so undocumented immigrants who are convicted of capital crimes. Now, this is huge because it basically removes the jury from the process, and it completely challenges constitutional precedent. So when it comes to the death penalty, let me just break that down really quick. In Florida, you have the trial based on the facts and the evidence, whether the person is guilty or innocent. Once you get past that, then there's a second hearing. If the person is found guilty and death penalty is on the table, there is a second hearing where mitigating circumstances are presented, aggravating circumstances are presented by both parties, and then the jury makes a decision as to whether or not the person should get the death penalty or get life in prison. Now, very recently, Florida changed the law around that again as a direct result of the Parkland massacre, where the jury decided to give him, the shooter at that time, life in prison. Before, you needed to have a unanimous verdict when it came to deciding death. So if you didn't have all 12 jurors agreeing to death, then life ended up being the sentence. Well, the Florida legislature changed that to make it 8 out of 12, which again is unconstitutional. So there's that again, because again, you've got to have a unanimous verdict. This is not a piecemeal type situation. That's not what the Constitution allows for. It is a unanimous verdict. Period. End of story. The only way for this to be appealed is if you have someone that goes through the criminal process, gets found guilty, then ends up getting the death penalty through a non-unanimous jury, then you can appeal that verdict and then take that up to the Supreme Court in terms of addressing the constitutionality of the lack of unanimity. So that's one issue. But now we have a whole other set of drama on top of this, where now you're saying undocumented immigrants won't get that second phase. If you are found guilty of a capital offense, you immediately go to death row. That's not how this works anywhere. And the reasoning behind this was that it was a compromise deal between Florida Governor DeSantis and legislative leaders who are basically trying to kiss up to the current presidential administration and saying that this is part of the immigration agenda that the current president is setting forth. But interestingly enough, it goes way further than what the presidential administration had even asked about. So the executive order that came from the current president would require prosecutors to seek the death penalty, but it still preserves the jury's ability to deliberate on whether or not death is appropriate or not. So he didn't take away the jury process. This law that was put in place in Florida does. So basically, this law says a court should sentence a defendant who is an unauthorized alien and who is convicted or adjudicated guilty of a capital felony to a sentence of death. Period. End of story. No room for jury or even judicial discretion. So Let's be clear. The U.S. Supreme Court has determined that there has to be individualized sentencing for each person. There's no blanket, all these people get this or all these people get that. You have to have individual sentencing for every single person because every case is different. Every set of facts is different. There's different mitigators, there's different aggravators. And when I talk about mitigators and mitigators could be you weren't the person who planned it. You were the getaway driver. You have a mental disability, didn't really understand what was going on, things like that. Aggravators being like it was a child, it was someone who was elderly, the manner that the person was murdered was so heinous, atrocious, and cruel that death was the only thing that was appropriate, right? So that's why you have that second part of the hearing. So all of these things could be fleshed out and the jury can make a decision, or the judge can even overrule the jury's decision and be like, y'all are dead wrong on this, right? This takes all of it off the table. What's even more problematic is that this is a very slippery slope, because if now you're saying, oh, someone's legal status now entitles them to the death penalty with no appropriate hearing, what's to say that tomorrow it's not going to be undocumented people, but it'll be people of the LGBTQ community, people of color, women, people of the Jewish faith. Once you start to get away from the rules and the Constitution, all you start to have is a slippery slope of problems. So this is not a good thing at all. And to put a final point on this, the reason why this is unconstitutional, it is because it runs afoul of the Eighth Amendment, which prohibits cruel and unusual punishment. And it's cruel and unusual to punish somebody without due process. That's kind of what democracy is about. If you can't have due process, then we're no longer in a democracy. Because guess what? Putin doesn't give you due process. You don't get due process in North Korea. You just get shot. So if we're starting to move away from this and start to chip away bit by bit by bit at the constitutional protections that keep all of us safe and free, we're going to have problems. Now, this is not to discuss about, listen, if you're undocumented and you're here, you should be deported. If you're convicted of crime, that's fine. I got no issue with that. But what I do have a problem with is, again, that lack of due process in terms of that jury process deciding whether or not death or life is appropriate. Because again, once we start moving away from the Constitution like this is not going to be a good thing. And so the last case I'm going to cover today is out of my beloved hometown of New York. Eric Adams. Eric Adams, he is the story that keeps on giving. Woof. Okay. So, as folks may remember, Eric Adams was charged by federal prosecutors for a host of crimes, including bribery and campaign finance violations, a whole heap of problems. There were rumors for a while that the case may be dropped as a result of the new presidential administration coming in, or that the current president would issue him a pardon. Reason why is because New York is very critical to the current administration's plans of mass deportations. So, under the new administration, the U.S. attorney, because again, these are federal charges, the U.S. attorney of the Southern District of New York was ordered to drop the charges against Eric Adams. And so, interestingly, the feds asked to drop the case, but without prejudice, meaning that they can come back and refile it at any time. Meaning that they have Eric Adams by the you fill in the blank. Because if he does not comply with what the president wants him to do, he's going to end up with charges showing back up at his door. So now he has to do his bidding if he wants to stay out of prison. So that's very interesting. Now we have a situation where you have a president blackmailing a mayor. Where are we, y'all? Where are we? And so you look at this, and of course, I've been very clear I'm no Eric Adams fan, but I am a fan of the rule of law. And so if you have a prosecutor's office that did the investigation, found the evidence, moved forward and got an indictment, which means they put it before a grand jury. The grand jury looked at it and said, yep, a crime may have occurred here, right? Not only that, the feds went back to the grand jury and ended up creating what we call a superseding indictment, meaning, wait, we've got more charges. We've actually found more evidence to make this thing even worse. And then now they're being ordered to drop the case out of politics. Yeah, that's not a good thing. And so as a result of this happening, 7 federal prosecutors resigned in protest, including the interim U.S. attorney for the Southern District of Florida. On top of that, you had 4 of Mayor Adams' top deputies quit as well. They're like, we want no part of this, right? And then New York Governor Hochul weighed in. There was a whole big question as to whether or not she was going to actually remove him from office because she had legal grounds to do so. But she was like, you know what? Democracy is under attack right now. New York City can't deal with even more turmoil. It would be worse to pull him out of office, so let me not. But I am going to provide more oversight over his office. And that includes in creating a new role for a new Deputy Inspector General solely for the city of New York, providing additional funding to the state comptroller to probe the city's finances. And she basically wants an explicit mechanism or a clear pathway for the city's comptroller, the city's public advocate, which is a very unique role to New York City, and for the New York City Council to be able to launch lawsuits against the federal government. Ooh, the tea is just getting thicker. So, of course, this is all up before state lawmakers to put their stamp on this. And if it approves, this oversight will expire in 2025, this year, when Eric Adams's term is up, and then is going to be subject to future renewal. So keeping in mind, he's still going to run again for another term. Now, will he win? Somehow I highly doubt that, because already everybody's lining up to challenge him. So we'll see what happens there. But to make things even more interesting, when I say he keeps giving, he keeps giving. Charges get dropped. Fine. You think Eric Adams is like, yay, whew, okay, I dodged a bullet. Let me figure out how to help the president, da-da-da-da-da. Well, that's not quite what he does. He is now suing the president on behalf of the city of New York, alleging that the current administration unlawfully took more than $80 million in Biden-approved funding in order to pay for the costs related to housing asylum seekers. Because remember, the Florida governor and the Texas governor were throwing undocumented people on buses and sending them up to what? Martha's Vineyard, to New York City, to Chicago, and basically dumping them on the streets. So now you have a situation where these cities are like, we were not expecting or prepared for this. And so they have to look for funds because, again, every year you've got your financial appropriations and you have, like anybody's budget, right? You have line items and you know how you're going to pay for everything else. There was no plan for 231,000 migrants that had no home, no job, no nothing. And also didn't even know why they were in New York City because that wasn't even where they were trying to go, right? So, interesting little wrinkle, though. It was the city comptroller, Brad Lander, who said in a statement last week that his office really had to go hard and pressure the mayor to allow the suit. He said, and I quote, "After my office discovered that Elon Musk and his Doge Goon Squad stole 80 million out of the city's coffers, we successfully pressured Mayor Adams to allow the city's lawyers to sue the federal government to get our money back. The lawyers who are standing up to President and Eric Adams' collusion deserve praise, and we look forward to the president returning the money he stole from New York." So, of course, Mayor Adams had to come out with his own statement and said basically the city has managed an unprecedented crisis after seeing more than 231,000 people arrive in search of shelter. He later said that FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, approved, paid, then rescinded, basically took back 80 million after the city spent more than 7 billion with a B, over 3 years to try to deal with the migrant crisis that again was brought on by these Southern Republican governors that thought they were being cute and dumping undocumented migrants at their doorstep, at the doorstep of all these other cities. And, the mayor said, rightfully so, that the FEMA funding is the bare minimum New York taxpayers deserve. I agree with him on that. Hey, even a broken clock is right twice a day. And so I conclude with the question of the week. And this came from Douglas Morgan, and it was in response to a video I did around how the Minneapolis police had basically left this poor couple, Davis and Caroline Maturi, to be harassed by their neighbor incessantly until it got to the point that the neighbor shot Davis Maturi, ended up shooting him in the neck. He survived, but again, had to be hospitalized. And this was a whole traumatic experience because, again, they were calling the police repeatedly saying, this person is a problem. He's making racial slurs. He's shooting his gun off the balcony. He's doing all of these crazy things. And the cops were like, okay. Well, finally you get to the point, you have the shooting. And then the Minneapolis sheriff was like, we can't go in and get the defendant. The defendant's name is Sonya. We can't really go in and get him because he is probably barricaded in his house with a ton of guns and is going to be just a very dangerous situation. That's what I kind of thought SWAT was for, but be that as it may. His question, Douglas Morgan's question was, here's a question for you. Does the victim have any recourse legally against the police for negligence? Glad you asked that. And the answer is yes. The Maturis can absolutely sue the police department and the city itself for negligence because it was, number one, lack of training. Because if you're all afraid to go in after a high-risk target, you haven't been trained properly. Number two, failure to respond. Because the department failed to respond to all the prior calls and concerns that the family was raising and could have prevented this. This was fully preventable. And it's just the fact that this family had to endure such abuse and then now have to endure the physical pain of recovery tells me they're going to get the pain and suffering. They're going to get all kinds of dollars. And if I had to guess, I would think that it would result in a settlement, much like what we saw in the Sonya Massey case and Breonna Taylor and others, because there's no way you're going to want to take that in front of a jury. The department was dead wrong. They knew they were dead wrong. And again, this kind of gives that feeling, again, after what happened with George Floyd and that whole, the Minneapolis City Council was very, hard on the department in terms of we need to see better protocols because you allowed Derek Chauvin to, basically abuse people previously. He had double-digit numbers of civilian complaints. And they still let him stay on the force. So again, another preventable death. George Floyd could have been still alive had they done something with Derek Chauvin. And so now you have a similar situation. If they had acted with, much more swiftly against the defendant Sawchuk, the Maturis would not have been injured and wouldn't have to have gone through all of this drama. So yes, they can sue. And yes, they're going to win. Thank you all for tuning in for another Mondays with Melba. I'm Melba Pearson, also known as the Resident Legal Diva, and I will see you next Monday. Take care.
Thank you for watching Court Authorities, part of the MeidasTouch network. We're at the intersection of law, politics, and true crime. I'm Dave Ehrenberg, aka the Florida Lawman. If you want more of this content, hit that subscribe button, and we'll see you next time.